although Professor Babu Matthew said that I have to speak on the human rights scenario, I don't wish to speak on the broader contours of human rights. In fact, I have prepared a paper on right to education, a comparative analysis of US and Indian experience. And this paper focuses on closure of schools in US and India, publicly funded schools. Although I would, to locate or to situate the issue, I would say that what is comparable between United States and India, or between Dalits and African Americans, is the discrimination, violation, crime, violence, whatever we have been discussing from yesterday. But as Babu Matthews observed, that the contrast is that Saraswati presentation, that how many scavengers, manual scavengers died in this country, and how many Dalits have been killed in this country, is a shocking number. But the difference between the black and India, myself, Anand Teltunde, were discussing what is not comparable between the Dalits and the American Africans or African Americans is the protest. See, after one black was killed, the riots. You have seen one picture where perhaps thousands of people gathered to protest, one death. And she has also shown us what are the different forms of protest, how they are innovating. And she also made one very interesting observation, the personhood and the property. In other words, it's raising a very fundamental question that the destruction of property is violence at all. Whether killing of a human being is violence. What do you consider as violence? If property is destroyed, property can be reconstructed. But if a human being is killed, he can't be brought back or she can't be brought back. I think that difference between the value of the property and the value of the human being has to be understood when one understands the resistance and the protest. Recently we had Sydney May, we had an encounter where 20 people were shot dead to protect the forest wealth. And because the Chief Minister wants to construct a capital, he needs wealth, and he thought one way of protesting that property was to kill 20 people to send a message that they should not kill the forest. I think in India, human life has come to become, it has been our, perhaps conception that human life was never considered precious. I think that's where perhaps the Indian Dalit movement has a lot to benefit and to learn from the black protests from US. Of course, the corporate democracy of US has been dealing with this population different way, but it has reached a point where they had to pass a patriotic act which literally has taken away several rights of the American citizen. And if you read the Patriot Act, it has not only gives arbitrary power to the American state and American police, but it also gives the power that American state can go anywhere to any corner of the world. When you read the act, you are struck that who gives the power to American state to go to any corner? And that was the act under which they came to Pakistan and they say that they caught Bin Laden and threw him in a ocean. Who gives power to a state, American state, to enter other nation states which are sovereign? I think this is something very surprising that America today think it can go to any corner of the world. It not only violate the rights of its own citizens, but it has acquired the power to violate the rights of any citizen in the world. I think that's where the danger for the human rights, lie. And I still recall when I was in the Center for Human Rights of University of Hyderabad, American Civil Liberties Association, quite a number of leaders came to my university, and they came mainly to discuss how we fought against the TADA, one of the acts, under the name of terrorism, we had an act, and the POTA. So they were asking us how you have built the public opinion and saw that the acts are repealed or they lapse. They said, we want to benefit from Indian struggle, that how you manage to see that a terrorist or the Prevention Act, which has given arbitrary power to states, has been repealed. So we were quite struck that American Civil Liberties Association was interested in benefiting from the civil rights movement of India, and civil rights movement of India is looking forward to the black protests, that how the people have to protest when there is a loss of human life. But since that's not the reference point, nor I wanted to speak on that, but since Babu Matthew said that, just broadly touch the human right. But I am locating the problem of the closure of the schools in America and India. Education as a human right, I think, is now universally accepted. Nobody would say that people should remain illiterate. I think that mankind has advanced to a point where I think nobody would today say that somebody should remain illiterate. I think that much of consensus is there. While property and power are asymmetrical in a society, at least access to education and knowledge has to be equal. It is the minimum that one can do. In other words, if power, property and knowledge, if they were to be treated as the driving forces, I think the world increasingly is getting reluctant to redistribute the power and more so the property, at least have the access to knowledge. That's the minimum right that we can guarantee. And India is one society and Hinduism is one religion which believes and which stipulates that human beings are not born equal. I think this is the only religion in the world who says human beings are born unequal. Human beings may become unequal, but by birth somebody is unequal is something one, if one looks at the whole ideological structure, that inequality is built into the very psyche of the society, the very cultural structure of our society. And that's the reason why millions of people were denied education apart from the various other rights. And people remained illiterate, continue to be illiterate. Perhaps the largest number of illiterates today in the world are in India. In a sheer number, I am talking there. In absolute number, I think the largest number of illiterates are in India. Now, although Constitution of India in a way guaranteed a right to education, I think in the entire long history, we may have 5,000 years of history, American history is 400. But our history is a very long history. We are very proud. The greater the past you go, more you think is a great country, and we think that in having had such a long history, it was in 2009 first time we have accepted right to education as a fundamental right. Until then it has not been a part of the fundamental rights chapter. But while we have passed an act in 2009 making education as a fundamental right for the children of this country, if you look at the act itself is flawed. While Act was welcome, but Act itself is flawed. And the number of loopholes in the Act. The very definition of a child, 6 to 14 years, PPP model, budget is not committed. It was a half-hearted attempt on the part of the Indian government when they accepted the right to education. It should have been backed by enough of funds, and the education should have been free, and it should have been equal to all, and the private education should have been controlled and finally given up, and all schools in this country should have been free, compulsory, and quality education should have been guaranteed, but we have not done that. But after 5 years of implementation of the Act, to our great surprise, last year and this year, hundreds of schools are being closed in India. 100,000 schools have been closed this year. 100,000, 1 lakh schools have been closed this year. And the very surprising that each state, Rajasthan has closed down 17,000 schools this year. Maharashtra 14,000 schools. Andhra Pradesh 11,000 schools, and in Telangana they wanted to close down 4,000 schools. Anyway, we have prevailed on the government, at least for time being. We have seen that the government doesn't close a single school because we had a very militant, very powerful movement in Telangana, and we have seen to it that, in fact, although I am working here, I had to go back to my own state in order to prevail on the government, and we were running a movement. Now, how did it happen? Why the schools are being closed? Now see, what has happened after when I was a student in my, village, I studied in my village, in my mother tongue. And when we were in the primary school, we had a teacher for every class. We had a classroom for the first, second, third, fourth, fifth. And we had a drawing master, we had a drill master. That was my job. This was education in the 50s I am talking. And this was the education in 1960s. And the World Bank enters India, and the World Bank in 1990, early 1990, introduced and they financed the DPEP program, and they give a scheme to the government of India. Foolish fellows, they have accepted that, and they have introduced multi-grade system in government school. What do you mean by multi-grade system? There is a 5 classes in a primary school, there are 2 teachers. And in the multi-grade class, in the same classroom, 3 batches sit, second, third, fourth, and 1 teacher in the class. Now he gives one problem to one batch and moves to another batch. I think this is nowhere in the world that 3 standard children belong to second, third, fourth standard sit in the same classroom. And I don't know how the government of India accepted this program at all. Child needs a lot of focus. It needs that. No private school does this. Now with the result, what happened? The entire primary school system has been ruined. It has been destroyed. With the result, the very credibility of the primary school education under the government has now become so low that no poor man, no villager, nobody would like to send their child to the government school. And today government school means no quality, absolutely useless, and no person is willing to send the child unless compelled to the to the government school. And the private schools prospered. So many private schools have come up, multi-layered school, international school, concept school, public school, that school, this school. There are as many classes as there are, the educational system. No country should have multi-layered, education. Every child needs to have access to quality education, free education, equal education. That's what is called a right. But in this country, this is what happened. And today, the schools are being closed. Poor people can't afford to send their child to the private school, and the poor people think that the government school is good for nothing. This is the crisis of India at this point of time. But the United States of America is not lagging far behind. That's what surprises us. Now, in the last 10 years, in United States of America, the publicly funded schools are being closed, and hundreds of schools are being closed. Very surprising. And because America, if one good feature of American system, if at all one has to welcome and one has to emulate, is the common school neighborhood skill system. They had a common school through neighborhood, and maybe the funds were given through the taxation, but the school was open, it was free, it was accessible, and it was in the neighborhood, so that the child can go to the school which is located one's own neighborhood. But what has happened over a period of time, that because of the tax system, and the poor people live in certain neighborhood, particularly blacks, and when they live there, tax is very low, and with the result, quality of the education was not the same. As prosperous areas, lot of taxes paid, and therefore the quality of the school is. And then that's where the educational strategy of United States of America not to fund the areas which are low income groups, I think has been one of the major flaws in the common school through the neighborhood school system. With the result, what has happened, that the schools located in the black neighborhood or the African Americans, so they were completely then, and they started closing the school after school. The co-author of my paper, Ms. Jyoti, she's an Indian, but she's she's now citizen of US in the Portland, where for last 4.5 years, because her two daughters are also in the same school, and it's a girls' school essentially, and this school for last 4 years they have been fighting to somehow protect the school. Every year there is a struggle, and the blacks go protest, and the school threatened that they will close down. Last year when she came, I was asking her what happened to the school. She said, no, my school is still surviving, and I went to school. They promised that the school will not be disturbed this year. By the time she went back after her summer vacation, school has been closed down. And there are lots of protests, but the school said there is no, there is a budget cut and we can't run the school. But then this, and parents do not know what to do with the children. They are saying, all right, you send them to any school, we'll give you some, stamps or all that. But the problem, what she points out and writes is that the black children, because of the gang wars between one neighborhood, within the neighborhood, the child is unsafe to walk into the other neighborhood. In his own neighborhood he is safe, but to cross the boundary, the child becomes unsafe. And the children are now afraid how to, and parents also afraid how to send the children to the other neighborhood. Now, the whole question is that if you look at the way that the schools are closed down, now in 2012 onwards, public funded schools are closed in major cities like Philadelphia, New York, Chicago, Oakland, Ohio, New Orleans. The city of Chicago shut down 500 schools located primarily in the low-income groups and black and Latino areas. About 30,000 students are impacted because of the closure of schools in Chicago City. Now similarly in New York, 117 schools have been closed. And for last 10 years they have signed, the people who suffered, 59% of the children are American Africans in the New York schools, and 82% of children low-income group children. Now similarly in Philadelphia, they have closed down 23 schools at one go, and 3,700 the educational professionals have been rendered unemployed. They have just removed them, saying that no, schools have been closed and you find your own. And 81% of the children, African American children, have been affected because of the closure of the schools. Now that means the closure of the schools has become common both in India and US at the same time. Now what are the causes for the closure of the schools? The causes are, one is they say lack of funding, and in India of course they say that the quality is very poor, and with the result what happened? Low enrollment. Low enrollment is both in US and in India. This is cited as one of the example why the schools are being closed. And in India now, when we went and met the education minister of Telangana, he said 4,000 schools have less than 10 children, less than 15 children, and therefore we are closing down. Then I said, all right, what will happen to these 15 children? Okay, school has 15 children, you close down. This boy is now 6 years old, 5 years old, where will he go? And if the school is located 1 kilometer away, can the child walk 1 kilometer that young age? And who will bring him back? Now see, you have to provide some education even if they are 10. And then, so finally he agreed that all right, we'll close down not 40 school, 50 school. We say should not close down any school. He said there are zero enrollment. Even if there is a zero enrollment, retain a teacher and ask the teacher to go and see that why the children are not coming. And finally, government of Telangana has agreed that this year they will not close down the school, but Telangana has come because of a militant struggle. And we have a very powerful, educational movement in Telangana. This has been there for the last 30 years. I have been General Secretary of the Safe Education Committee, and we have been fighting. And last November, Anand Teltumde, myself, we are the members of the Presidium of All India Forum for Right to Education. We are fighting in 18 states of India to protect the education and public education. Publicly funded education. This movement is a very, we are intensifying the movement to save education, at least in Telangana. And when November month, the whole month, of course I toured Karnataka, I had extensively traveled, I went to Nagaland, I went to Tamil Nadu, and we have gone to different parts of India to mobilize the public opinion in favor of publicly funded education. Because every child has to have a quality education and has to have access to it. That I think is a civilizational requirement. And therefore I think that's why Anand in the morning was mentioning, when you talk of reservation, when you talk of the Dalit opportunities and all that, you must start somewhere else. While reservation is a very important question, you must start somewhere, a structural question. If all children have quality education and access to education, I think that's the beginning of structural transformation. But if the education itself is hierarchical, it is highly graded, and is a multi-layered school, then I think it is very difficult to have the process of transformation. So therefore we believe in the educational movement, and therefore we, in New York, of course even in US they are struggling. In New York they have taken 7,000 people have taken a big procession to protect the publicly funded schools. In all cities of America where schools are being closed, people are protesting. And so is the case with India. Perhaps what is required is that how do we really build very militant, powerful movements, mobilize the public opinion, and create such conditions in the society that people should be in a position to demand education as a right, but they should also be in a position to demand that equal education and quality education for all children of the country. My last observation is that this is happening because of the neoliberal model of development, both in US and in India. Perhaps it's happening all over the world. This model of development that we have adopted is such a model that it believes that individual should be left to himself. Any collective activity, any welfareism is a constraint on the process of growth. And if you see the shock doctrine of Naomi's book, they are conducting experiments in Guantanamo Bay, where they are putting shock treatment and all that and making the Iraqi prisoners to forget welfareism. They are making an experiment how you can make human beings to forget welfareism. And what is the logic? Logic is welfareism is considered in an embryonic form of communism. And they think communism has come to an end, but welfareism survives. If welfareism survives, logically it will go to communism. And that's the reason that they are conducting this experiment. Today, welfareism has come to be considered something negation by the dominant classes of the very process of growth. I think this undemocratic thinking on the part of the assumptions of this model of development, which focuses on the property, prosperity, growth, and not the human being, human development, welfare, equality, and freedom, I think civilizationally we entered into a very critical phase. And the American blacks and Indian Dalits are paying a heavy price for the model of development. And therefore, all the movements have to be situated in such a way that we fight not only for our rights, but fight against the larger model of development, which is responsible for closure of schools all over the world, and more so in US and India. I stop here, and I'm sorry, sir, I'm sorry that I've taken more time, but thank you very much.